My story is perhaps the exact opposite of a traditional rags to riches tale. I'm not the most relatable or sympathetic protagonist, but I hope you'll hear me out. As a child, I didn't have to wait for my birthday to get the latest toys or games like my friends did. I owned an iPad by the time I was 12, not even a teenager yet. All I had to do was ask Dad, and he'd get me the thing I wanted before the end of the week. Being a well-respected surgeon meant he was able to do that for his family. I believed my dad loved us all and took pride in his ability to provide for us. Me, Mom, and my sister Emily all lived in a luxurious 3-story house in a gorgeous suburban area which he paid for with his life-saving work. I was very proud of my dad in return. Mom didn't have to work and focused on her painting, while it was expected that Dad would pay for Emily and me to go to university. The future seemed bright and carefree. However, even before I finished middle school, Dad seemed to spend less and less time with us, and Mom got more and more stressed. Being a kid with friends and toys and studies all the time, I didn't notice how different things had become until I came home from school one day and found my parents shouting. Normally, my parents never shouted. I almost didn't believe it was them until I walked into the kitchen and saw my mom in tears and my dad ripping up a card right in front of her face. She called him selfish, and he called her a gold digger who couldn't go a week without running up a bill as high as the Eiffel Tower. Then they spotted me, and Dad ordered me to go to my room. When I got upstairs, I found Emily already in my room crying. I tried to comfort my younger sister, but inside I felt like my whole world was crumbling. Perhaps I wasn't the most fortunate out of all my friends, after all. Despite feeling like my world was ending, life did go on. Me and my sister avoided doing everything that might upset Mom, who always looked tired. Even when she began selling our things without any warning, we kept quiet. My iPad, Emily's laptop, and the family Nintendo Wii were all sold. "It's to pay the bills," she said. I also noticed she was wearing a lot less jewelry and wondered if she was selling that too. Meanwhile, it almost felt like we didn't have a dad. He was always out working, and yet there was never any money to show for it. Once again, it was when I came home from school one day that I found something that would shake me to the core. With the constant stress and tension always around my mom, perhaps I should have expected it, but I was horrified when I found her sobbing alone into the couch. Once she had been a beautiful and confident woman. I hated to see her like this. I knew immediately that something was very wrong, and I rushed over to beg her to tell me. She told me through her tears. Dad's car had been found in the lake in the park near my school, and they were still trawling the bottom for his body. He was presumed dead, and professionals had already been in touch about his will and his funeral. She didn't know what to do. Neither did I. Life without Dad was hard. On top of the obvious and unbearable grief that my whole family underwent, we had to move to a smaller house and live a much more frugal lifestyle. To those of you who might have thought I was spoiled at first, I learned the value of everything I had in the most cruel way possible, and I never took anything for granted again. I stopped expecting to get things I wanted, even if it was my birthday. I shared a room with my sister, and I did a paper round on Sundays to help towards our household's expenses. Mom said we were lucky because it could have been a lot worse. She found out that Dad had been hiding from us the enormous amount of debt he had fallen into while trying to maintain our lavish lifestyle. And when he'd been unable to keep the act up, he'd fallen into a terrible depression. As much as we would rather he was still here, his death meant the debt was gone, and we could start again. For 3 years, we lived much more responsibly, and the hurt from our loss faded. Mom has to work 6 days a week to take care of her 2 children, and we were very grateful for all her love and efforts. I resolved to get a job straight out of school to help out, and my sister studied harder than ever with the hope of getting a scholarship. I rarely saw my friends outside of school because I was always trying to help Mom or Emily, but very occasionally they would convince me to get a coffee. It was a Friday when one of my 2 closest friends convinced me to hang out while she showed pictures from her holiday in Spain. Each picture looked warm and happy with glittering blue waters, fresh Spanish food, and many cozy group photos of her family. It made me think of how my family was broken, until I saw something in the photo that made my jaw drop open, and I couldn't find the words to speak as I pointed. It was my father. He'd grown a beard and had more forehead wrinkles, but I was sure it was him. My friends told me it couldn't be him, and I said maybe I should get some rest. But I didn't listen to them. I demanded she sent me a copy of the picture so I could show my mom. I ran all the way home like a madman and burst through the door shouting her name. Thankfully, she was home, getting ready for her next shift. I showed her the picture on my phone and asked her if she saw anything. She also went speechless as she saw the man in the background and turned white as a ghost. I knew my dad, and she knew her husband. I felt so many things. Hope, excitement, confusion, anger. How could he still be alive? My mother and I submitted the photo to the authorities and filed a missing persons report. The police also thought the evidence was good and believed maybe it was possible, seeing as they had never found his body. They contacted Spanish authorities, and soon we were told every police station in that area of Spain had a poster of his face and an order to bring him in. It felt like life was on pause while we waited, unsure if they would actually find anything or if it was too much to hope. However, although it felt like an eternity, it was less than a week before we got our result. He had been found. He was living in a Spanish apartment and working as a waiter. He had already known basic Spanish, and in the 3 years he'd been gone, he'd taught himself to near fluency. We cried with shock and relief when the officers gave us the news. Mom wrote him a few letters back and forth. Emily and I added our handwritten messages. It felt surreal to say the things we'd never got a chance to before. We begged him to come home, but most of all we wanted an explanation. He agreed to visit and told us all in full the day he came back. He said that he had faked his death deliberately to get his debts cancelled so that his wife and children could have a better life unweighed down by his poor financial management. His plan had worked better than he had imagined. So the road has been extremely hard, with heartbreak, tears, and a lot of growth and learning. But I can honestly say that I'm happy now with my family together again. I don't need money or a big house or fancy electronics to be rich. I just needed to be with the ones I love. The boys and I gather around a table for our bi-weekly story night. They provided the food this week, and I am providing them with a story from a few summers ago about an extraordinary woman I met, dated, and began to love. We all settle around the table and talk amongst ourselves while picking out our food. It is a cold day in the middle of winter, and the fireplace in the lodge we are renting is crackling. Our group leader raises his hands and thanks us all for coming. After a brief introduction of all the members, the focus turns to me. I'm told I can begin after we decide the next day, and once I begin telling the story, I begin to relive the moment as I hope the others will. It was a warm summer of July, and I was walking along a strip of stores as I caught a fair woman at the corner of my eye. She was in the window of a coffee shop and seemed to be observing a meeting in disgust, held amongst men in suits who spoke rather loud, simultaneously, while also reading a book. Her hair was a chestnut brown, and her eyes were a pale blue. She had fair skin with a golden Californian tan. She wore a relaxed pair of capri and a nice blouse. This was paired with a pair of nude heels, despite the fact she appeared quite tall. I went in to talk to her despite my fear and awkward personality. She agreed to get to know me, and we began dating fairly quickly, me believing that this woman would one day be my wife, and her conning me throughout it all. She was a very private woman throughout the time we were together. We didn't discuss her family or living situation, nor did we discuss bank info or where she went when she wasn't with me. Those did throw me off a few times and worry me that she may be cheating. She also kept her phone locked and was on it at weird hours of the night. However, I decided to trust her and know that she wouldn't hurt me. This helps me accept the odd situation and live what felt like a normal and happy life. After quite a while of being together, she and I decided to put some money together and take a vacation for our 3rd anniversary. This is where I plan to propose to her. I asked her where she wanted to go, and in her slightly accented voice she replied, "Let's go to Rome. It's beautiful there." I agreed, and went online for plane tickets later that night and booked a hotel for us to stay at. I then checked the time for the wedding ring's arrival to be sure that I would have it ready to go, on time for the trip and the proposal. Once I was sure that it was all organized and I had everything ready to go, I prepared to go to bed and impatiently wait for the exciting week to come. We got up early the morning of the trip. I did some last-minute preparations and packing, and then we called an Uber to take us to the airport. It was a fast ride there as my girlfriend and I talked excitedly about what we would do once we arrived in Rome. During this drive, it fueled my excitement and reminded me of why I wanted to marry this woman. I smile at her glowing eyes as we pull into the airport. We get out of the car and head through the security checkpoint and on to baggage claim and the ticket taking. The security guard asked us both for our passports and tickets. I took mine out of my bag and asked for hers. When handing it to the security guard, I caught a glimpse of the birth date on my girlfriend's passport. November 15th? Once we walk past, I look at her with a questioning glance. Lovely, I thought you said your birthday was November 25th. It is, she replied. Well, then why did your passport say the 15th? I don't know. Government malfunction? Maybe? She stammered at the response, but weird as it was, I accepted it as it was. As we were headed to the plane, I was thinking about how odd some things over time have been between us, aside from the passport situation. Sometimes we would be walking and she would ask me to film strangers walking down the street, or we would even discreetly follow them. Most of the time they seemed to be on the wealthier side of life and had on nice clothing. She would also occasionally give me sealed envelopes or files with strict instructions to not ever open them under any circumstances. I decided to put these worries behind me and chalked it up to cold feet. As we walked through the airport, I noticed she kept nervously looking around us, as if someone was chasing her. She also occasionally sped up her walking pace and pulled her hood of her sweatshirt up further to mostly conceal her face. We keep walking while I protectively stand behind her, in case she is uncomfortable with something happening or someone really is watching. We wait a short while for our plane to be loaded, and when it's called over the system, we both jump up in excitement for the trip, talking again of what we will do there once we arrive. Suddenly, I notice that there is a closing in of men who appear to be security guards. I freeze, scared of the fact that they are coming straight for us. Once they surround us, they handcuff us and remove us from each other and into separate rooms for questioning. I later discovered that for 3 years, my girlfriend hid from me that she was a Russian spy. I have yet to see her since then, and I have wondered whatever happened to her. I'm glad we didn't get married, but it did give me one good story to tell.